When we're talking about garden planning, choosing what specific seeds you're going to grow in your garden, I think is probably one of the most underrated ways that you can make your garden more low maintenance. Garden planning starts with your seeds. It starts with deciding what you want to grow and when you're going to grow it. And I think this can be really overwhelming because you don't know what seeds are best, right? Like you don't know what company to buy from. January and February, I'm just getting packages in the mail like every other week from different seed companies, because part of what I like to do is test different seed companies so that I can kind of recommend them to you. There's two kind of elements to selecting what seeds you're going to grow. And when I say that, I don't mean like, are you going to grow zucchini or not? I mean, what kind of zucchini are you going to grow once you've decided you want to grow zucchini in the first place? Just continuing on with this as an example, I deal with a lot of squash vine borers. I know that this is a huge problem for so many other gardeners, especially along the Northeast. So we need to be looking specifically for varieties of zucchini and squash that are bred to be resistant to different types of pests that we see in our gardens all the time, like squash vine borers. So this specific spread, a lot of it is just stuff that I'm really excited to grow. But the other part of this that's not so much variety specific is actually keeping in mind where your seeds are coming from. So for me, this means that I'm looking for seed companies that source their seeds from farmers that are growing in the Northeast or in climates very similar to mine. Because if I try to get seed from a farmer that sources all of their seed, they produce it in California, those seeds are not going to be as cold hardy. They're not going to be as adapted to the temperature changes that we see in early spring. We could have stunted growth as a result. And this is not to scare you. I've grown seeds from companies all over the country, and it doesn't necessarily have a huge impact. When you're first starting out, you're not going to notice these things as much. But as you kind of get deeper and deeper into your gardening journey and you start taking notes of like what's working and what's not, you're going to notice that you see the same problems cropping up again and again with different crops, just like I did with the zucchini. So I still think that this video will be very relevant to you, even if you're not growing in the exact same climate as me. We're not going to be talking specifically so much about climate, just about problems in general, and solving those problems through seed selection. Of course, the best way to get seeds that are adapted to your climate and the specific pests that you're used to dealing with, the diseases that you're used to dealing with in your garden, is to save your own seeds. But we have to start somewhere. A lot of times we don't have the seed that we need to start saving it in the first place. But seed saving is not only a really great way to save money, it's a really great way to get seeds that are adapted to those issues so that they can kind of improve year over year and you can have less and less of those issues over time. So this is just one order that I got from Southern Exposure Seed Exchange. I have not grown from them personally. I really wanted to give them a try, specifically because they had a lot of varieties that I was having trouble finding other places. Now, of course, Southern Exposure meaning that they're typically from down south. However, what I'm realizing is that things are warming up here, and our climate is starting to be a lot more like North Carolina's climate. So this is where there's kind of like the nuance, right? Like I also have an order coming in that's not here yet, but we'll talk about what seeds I got from them from Fedco. Fedco is in Maine. So they're right up north from me. They deal with cold weather climates and their seeds are very hardy, very adapted. Like I got my diamond eggplant from them last year because eggplant is notorious for being very sensitive to cold and to wind. And they had developed this variety and adapted it to the Maine climate so that it would do better in our climate. So there's nuance here. Of course, it's a safer bet for me to go with Fedco because they're much closer to what my actual climate is right now. But knowing that the seasons are getting warmer and warmer, I wanted to give Southern Exposure a try. So this will be kind of a fun preview of some of the stuff that we're doing in the summer this year, because there's a few plants here. I know we had the tea garden last year. We've got our vegetable garden, we have our herbs. But this year, we're going to be doing something a little bit different than anything I've seen before on the internet. We're actually going to be growing a fiber garden as well. One thing I don't really get a chance to talk about on here is that I love fiber arts. I love spinning yarn, I crochet, I knit, I weave. This is just meant to be kind of a fun experiment. It's not going to be production level. I'm not going to be growing acres of cotton or flax or anything like that, but I did want to try to experiment with some fiber crops to see if I could spin them myself this year. So this will give you kind of a preview of what's going to be growing in that fiber garden as well as the rest of the garden for the year. But I'm very excited and interested to see how that turns out. And a lot of these were things that I kind of like was jealous because I saw other gardeners growing them last year. I was like, oh, I wish I had grown those myself. So one of those being peanuts. In New England, it's a little bit harder to grow peanuts here. The best variety to grow in a colder climate is actually something called Red Valencia. I haven't done much research yet into what we're going to need to do to grow these peanuts. If I have to direct sow them or transplant them, I might be able to do either. I'm guessing since we're in a shorter climate, it'll be better to transplant them, but sometimes with root crops, that's not really an option. But just a little preview of something we'll be hopefully learning how to grow together on the channel this year. Our second big seed packet, because I just feel like I want to get the big seed packets out of the way because that's just how my brain works, is actually part of the fiber garden. So this is flax. I got the avian variety. I don't really know very much about flax at all. This was just what they had available, so I thought we'd give it a try. I believe flax is going to be a little bit more challenging to process into fiber than some other things. So I'm curious. We'll see how this goes. At least I think it makes really pretty flowers anyway, so even if we don't get fiber from it, it'll still be fun to try. This is kind of a version of one that I was actually really envious whenever I saw anyone harvesting it on Instagram. It's a purple potted asparagus bean. So this is kind of like those noodle beans, those really, really long ones, but they're purple. And you guys know I'm a sucker for anything purple. I'm always trying to add more purple to the garden. So if there's a purple option, I'm going to take it. And sometimes that's honestly how I make a decision. If I'm just overwhelmed looking through seeds and I'm like, oh my God, there's like 10 different kinds of noodle beans. Which one do I want? Like, I'll either text Meg or someone and be like, what kind did you grow and what do you recommend? Or I'll just go with one that looks the prettiest, unless it specifically says like one is better for a cold climate than others, in which case I'll do that. But in this case, I just really didn't know, and I just went for the one that seemed like it would be the most fun. So this year we did glass gem corn, which is a flint corn. And flint corn means it's for popcorn. You let it dry on the stalk and then you pick it and you can pop the corn. You can actually pop it on the cob or you can take it off. But as I was harvesting it this year, I was thinking like, oh, I wish I had done some sweet corn of our own, because we love to get it from the local farm. Like, it just has such a better flavor when you get it fresh from someplace local. Sweet corn is so juicy, right? And so if you get it from the store, it's pretty old and it's dried out a lot. Local sweet corn, I can even eat it raw. Like, you don't have to cook it. So I did get painted hill sweet corn this year, which is a variegated variety. Now, I already know this from growing the flint corn, but when you're growing corn in like a smaller area, it doesn't self-pollinate as well. So you end up needing to kind of do what I call the tassel dance. You actually take the pollen tassel and you rub it on the corn silks, because every one of those corn silks coming out of the ear of corn, that connects directly into a kernel. So every single one of those silks needs to make contact with pollen in order to get a full cob with all the kernels on it. So it's a little bit tricky in that respect, but I think corn is definitely a really fun one to grow. It's a very hungry plant. It has some really interesting root systems. You got to make sure that you're putting it in very nutrient dense soil or fertilizing it. I never fertilize mine because our soil is really good here. It's also important to wait until late spring to plant your corn when the soil temperatures are at or above like 65 degrees, because it needs that warmth in order to germinate. Sometimes I grow something one year and then the next year I'm like, I'm not gonna bother, and then I end up regretting it. And this is one of those things. So these are called a couple of different names. I call them cucamelons. They also go by mouse melons or sour gherkins. They look like teeny tiny doll-sized watermelons, but they're actually cucumbers, and you can eat them just like grapes. Like, honestly, they're that small. I didn't grow them this year, and I really, really missed having them. Like, they're just a fun, really unique thing that you're not going to be able to find in the store. So I like to have stuff like that in the garden to look forward to. I had no issues with pests or diseases on these, so I just went with your regular old generic variety. Honestly, I don't even know that they have that many different types of these. Like, generally when I see them in the seed catalogs, each company just has one kind. I said that 2024 was gonna be my year of the squash, and it did not turn out that way because of the squash vine borer. So we're trying a couple of new types this year. Even though I had seed left over from last year, I really just want to kind of continue to test things out and see what's gonna do really well. So I have a few here that I didn't get specifically because they said they were squash vine borer or powdery mildew resistant. I just wanted to try a new type of them to see if I had better luck than I did last year. We do have a few varieties though that are specifically for squash vine borers, which we'll get into in a minute. One of the ones that I want to try this year that I didn't have last year at all was spaghetti squash. I've had like a love-hate relationship with spaghetti squash, but I think I've finally figured it out. Like when I'm cooking them and I use like a red tomato sauce on them, I feel like it gets really watery and it doesn't like emphasize the flavors and the textures that I want to emphasize in a spaghetti squash. However, this past fall, I tried it with more of like a creamy, almost like a spinach artichoke dip type sauce, and it was so good. So if you've tried spaghetti squash before and you didn't like it because it was watery, I would recommend trying it with something that was more of a cream-based sauce or stuffing it with something that's a little bit more filling and see if you like it that way. I honestly don't remember what they called this one online. So this just says DMR 401 slicing cucumber. I know that I picked this cucumber because it said it was specifically resistant to cucumber beetles, which were a huge issue that I had. I also had a huge issue with blight, which this one I believe said it was more resistant to just blight and other diseases in general. So I really need a cucumber that's very easy to grow. I tried to grow like 4 different types last year that were more just like novelty fun cucumbers like suyo and lemon cucumbers. But what ended up happening was I got one round of cucumbers. They all got diseases. I had no cucumbers for the rest of the year. And I realized I would much rather have one regular basic cucumber that takes me through the whole season in terms of a low maintenance garden than some that I'm experimenting with and then end up risking having no cucumbers for the rest of the summer. So for me, that was my decision, and just kind of the thought process that went into it was like, okay, I need something that's really low maintenance because this is something that I want to have a lot of. So when it's something where I'm just experimenting with it and I don't necessarily need it to be part of my production goals for the year, which is something we talked about in my roundup video, is I really want to try to focus on producing a lot more per plant on certain varieties that I know I like a lot of. And cucumbers fall into that category. So it's more important that it's boring and safe in this case. This is another one where I was just kind of envious of other gardeners for having it. I feel like everyone else has it but me. So this is just a broad Windsor fava bean. I don't really honestly have that much to say about it. I've never eaten a fava bean. I've never grown a fava bean, but I see people growing them and they look like they're easy and fun to grow. So I want to give it a try. Before we move into the next stack, I just wanted to thank you guys so much for all the support and kind words. I did give you guys an update on my health and surgery situation. I'm pre-recording these videos for you, so I actually am recording this right after I've just shared the video about the fact that I am having surgery for my endometriosis. And I had a lot of people reaching out and just asking how they could help during this time, which is so appreciated and not at all expected. But I am a small business owner. Doing this kind of content creation online is my full-time job. No one can fill into me and I don't get paid time off. So I really appreciate you asking. The 2 main things that you guys can do to support my channel while I'm out recovering from my surgery are honestly just to watch my videos. I set up some playlists for you guys so it'll be easier to just kind of let them run and binge watch my content. So make sure you check those out on the channel. And there's also going to be a tab underneath this video and on my channel in general where you can shop my merch and my ebooks. So right now we've got a few ebooks out. We're hoping to add some more, but there's a mushroom growing guide on there. There's a vertical garden growing guide on there. And we also have t-shirts that I've worked really hard. It took me like a year, honestly, to find a company and a product that I really liked for the designs that we had. We've got 5 designs that are all inspired by the garden and chronic pain in general. I'm actually wearing one right now that says the pause is as important as the project, which is definitely a message that I need these days because I need to start slowing down and taking care of myself and getting ready for this surgery. But these are like really soft, not heavyweight, but not thin cotton. If you know t-shirts, they're the Comfort Colors brand, so they're probably the best of the best in my opinion. It's also a direct to film application, which means I know sometimes when you order like t-shirts from small businesses, you throw them in the wash, you throw them in the dryer, and the print cracks or it starts to fade. I really wanted something that was very low maintenance so that you didn't have to worry about washing it a specific way, and the direct to film process allows for that. So it's a very durable finish that's going to last a really long time. Dig through them, see if one of the messages resonates with you. I'm really happy with how they turned out. I spent a really long time getting the designs how I wanted them to be, getting the colors where I wanted them to be. I'll let you zoom in on this one a little bit. So it's got kind of like a cool like speckled design to it as well, which I think is just like a subtle effect that you might not notice from a distance, but really that does help me quite a lot. So I really appreciate you asking, and thank you guys so much again for all your support. Okay, moving on to our final stack here before we talk about the Fedco order that's not in yet. So I have another winter squash here. This is one that I haven't grown in a long time. I haven't even eaten in a long time because I find that it's really expensive when I see it at like the farmer's market or farm stands. It's called Delicata. This is the candy stick dessert variety. Delicata, I think, is such a beautiful squash. I believe it's one where you can eat the skin, and it's on the smaller side. So if there's just 2 of you at home, this is a great one where you're not making like a meal for 20 out of a huge squash every time you want to use it. We're going to go through all our squashes here now. Okay, and there's actually quite a lot of them. This was one that I specifically got for disease resistance. It's called lemon squash. It's just a summer squash, but lemon squash in particular said it was bred for disease resistance for squash vine borers. So we'll see how this one does. Along the same lines, we got a zucchini called Dark Star. I feel like I have trust issues with zucchini and summer squash at this point because the plants will be doing so great in the spring. I'm like so excited because there's all these baby squash on them, and then as soon as things start to take off and it starts to get more productive, we end up getting hit with the squash vine borer, which I think is probably one of the most horrifying tasks to have to deal with as a gardener, is trying to surgically extract these squash vine borers from the plant, and it hardly ever works, to be honest. So it's like, why do I even bother? But in terms of our production goals for next year, having a larger amount of zucchini and summer squash on hand is one of the things that's really important. So that's why you're going to see a lot more squash in here, because I feel like it's a great bang for your buck in terms of getting a lot of production out of it for less effort. So then kind of a hybrid summer winter squash is Tromboncino, and this one is so interesting to me. I'm fascinated with it. It's like a very long necked butternut squash that you can eat as a summer squash soft, or you can let it ripen on the vine and it will look more like a butternut and have a harder skin. I'll be growing the most of this one of anything alongside our tan cheese pumpkin. This is an heirloom variety that's been around forever. It does have the same kind of coloring as a butternut squash, which honestly butternut is the only thing that I grow that doesn't end up being susceptible to squash vine borer, because the vines I think are just so much thinner. And I think that's what makes the Tromboncino and the Seminole pumpkin so good in terms of squash vine borer resistance. And then last but not least, for pumpkins, we've got a Magic Cushaw. I don't really remember anything about this one, to be honest, but we'll see. I think I just got it because it looked interesting. A little embarrassed to admit that I haven't grown this one before, because I feel like it's the trendy plant to grow if you're a gardener on social media, and that's loofah. So loofah is just a really great plant, if you didn't know, for making sponges out of, but it seems like it's not very low maintenance from what I've observed of people growing it online. So I'm a little bit hesitant, and that's why I haven't grown it before. However, I use loofah sponges pretty much exclusively for dishwashing now. And then before we move on to the Fedco order, our last one for the fiber garden from Southern Exposure Exchange is cotton. I got red foliated white cotton. This is just your standard white cotton because I thought maybe we would end up doing some dye plants too. So if we could do a white cotton, spin it into yarn, then maybe we could dye it with something. I don't know. I'm getting all like crazy now. We'll see what happens with this one. I've never grown cotton before. I've never seen cotton grown before in a backyard garden. The plants grow to 3 to 6 feet tall though. So I'm not really sure where, like I feel like all these fiber plants are very large, and I don't know where I'm going to grow them because I don't want them just taking over one of my raised beds, especially because they take so long to mature. In the Fedco order that I had just put in, I was less less thinking about specific disease resistance the same way that I was for like the squash vine borers and the cucumbers, and more just thinking like, okay, it's Fedco. I know that these seeds are adapted to a climate similar to mine, so I can pretty much just grab whatever I want, which is really, really nice. If you're uncomfortable with seed shopping, if you can find a seed company that is very close to your actual local area, I think you're gonna find that you feel a lot more confident just impulse buying things, which seed shopping is the only place where I will encourage you to impulse buy things, because it's really honestly generally pretty affordable. And like, what's the worst that can happen? You grow something you don't like, you share it with someone else. So I did grab an Orange Glow watermelon from them, which is an orange watermelon. I've grown yellow before and I've grown red. And I actually prefer the yellow Mountain Sweet variety to red. So I'm curious to see how the orange compares to the yellow specifically. I also grabbed a Zephyr summer squash, a Carnival acorn winter squash, a black futsu winter squash. I had so much fun growing so many different varieties of peppers this last year, but one that I felt was really missing was pimientos, so I am gonna grow those this year. And last but not least, we've got one more that I'm kind of ashamed to admit I've never grown before, and that's onions. So I'm actually gonna be growing Patterson onions. I chose them specifically because they have a very long storage life, and I'd really like to grow a production level amount of like all the onions that we'll need for the whole year, because I go through a ton of onions in my cooking when we cook from scratch, which is pretty much every single day. And we'll actually be winter sowing these. So if you've been looking for a video on winter sowing, I do have one already, which I can link for you here. But keep an eye out, because over the next hopefully month or two, you're going to be seeing a new winter sowing video from me. We're actually going to sow all of our winter onions from seed. We're not doing onion starts, onion sets. We're doing onions from seed. So that's the 2025 seed haul that I have so far. I'm sure there will be impulse buys here and there. I didn't get any greens or things like that because I just already have like so many seeds saved from the years past. So I really didn't need to grab any. And there's some things that will obviously be starting from starts from the nursery. Like I usually grab my brassicas from the nursery in the spring. We get a lot of our peppers from the nursery because generally I don't like, it's harder for them to germinate here. It's just colder. Even with my seed mats, I don't have a ton of success all the time. So there's things like that that will come into the garden later. This is not everything that we're going to be growing. And I have a few more things coming that we'll be doing for the fiber garden as well. But this is our start. And I hope this video was helpful when we're talking about like growing a low maintenance garden. This is really the core of it, is figuring out what you're going to grow and why you're going to grow it. So let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Happy gardening.